Welcome to the deep dive. Ever leave a conversation feeling utterly depleted, as if someone just siphoned off your vital energy? Or that weird feeling, that maybe the reality we think we all share isn't quite experienced the same way by everyone. What if, and this is a really big what if, nearly half the people you interact with every day are running on a completely different internal operating system?
It definitely sounds like something ripped from science fiction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That kind of uncanny valley feeling.
Totally, like a Philip K. Dick novel, yeah.
And the material you brought us today, well, that dives headfirst into that very possibility. We're looking at the research from Laura Nijadzik and the Quantum Future Group.
Right.
And they draw on some really deep sources, ancient gnosis, the Cassiopean material.
Right.
And it paints this picture, this radical perspective on who exactly we might be sharing the planet with.
Radical is putting it mildly. It feels like it could completely change how you see, well, everything.
It really could. It flips the script on human interaction.
Absolutely. So in this deep dive, we're not just, skimming the surface. We are going full-on submarine into this PDF you sent over. Our mission is to pull out the most startling claims, the most thought-provoking ideas from this really unique viewpoint. Get ready for a ride that's, part philosophical maze, part cosmic mystery.
Cosmic whodunit, maybe?
Yeah, I like that. Now, let's be clear right up front. These are, they're seriously unconventional ideas. Some people might even find them pretty unsettling.
And that's understandable. I mean, any theory that suggests such a fundamental split in humanity, it's bound to stir things up. It challenges some really core assumptions we have about, the shared human condition.
No kidding. So our goal here isn't to judge, not to dismiss anything. We're just trying to understand the perspective being laid out here. We're going to follow the authors down this particular rabbit hole, see where it leads.
Exactly. Approach it with curiosity.
Think of us as your guides on this slightly weird intellectual expedition. Okay, buckle up, because you've given us some genuinely mind-bending material. We'll start big picture. Where did this whole concept even come from? And then we'll zoom into the nitty-gritty details. So, expert, where does an idea like organic portals begin?
Okay, so the main source for the organic portal idea, as it's presented in this material, is the work of Laura Nijadzik and the Quantum Future Group, primarily on their website, Cassiopeia.org. But, and this is really important, there's a significant disclaimer included right in the material you shared.
Yes, about another website, right? Montauk.net.
Exactly. Nijadzik makes a point of distancing her group's work from the interpretations found on Montauk.net.
It sounded pretty strong the way it was phrased.
It is. They cite major ethical and philosophical disagreements. Specifically, they seem concerned about what they see as a tendency over there towards, let's say, jumping to conclusions and maybe oversimplifying things into checklists for identifying people.
Checklists. Like spot the OP.
That's the exact phrase they warn against, yes.
They also specifically mention a couple of article titles from Montauk.net, things like Quantum God, Gravity Explained, and describe them pretty bluntly as word salad and nonsense.
Oof. Okay, so no love lost there.
Not much, it seems. The fundamental issue, from Nijadzik's perspective, appears to be a worry that the Montauk interpretation promotes an us versus them kind of thinking.
Right, creating divisions.
Which the Quantum Future Group explicitly states they are against. They emphasize that their own research is about understanding how reality works, the deep mechanics of it all, not about creating some kind of spiritual elite or encouraging people to label others. Their ethical stance against hasty labeling is really central to their approach.
Got it. So it's about intellectual curiosity, understanding the system, not making judgments about individuals. Okay, so with that important context, where did the actual term organic portal come from in their work? The term itself reportedly came through in communications attributed to this source they call the Cassiopeans. The Quantum Future Group has documented these communications extensively.
Cassiopeans. Okay.
But the underlying idea isn't totally new. It connects to earlier esoteric thinkers. You have P.D. Ouspensky, his student J.G. Bennett, and in particular Boris Moraviev in his work Gnosis. Moraviev is a key here because he introduces this fundamental distinction between two types or maybe lineages of human beings, what he calls Adamic man and preadamic man.
Adamic and preadamic. Okay, that sounds biblical almost. What's the difference according to Moraviev?
Well, in Moraviev's framework, Adamic man is described as having the latent potential for an individuated soul. And crucially, access, even if it's dormant, to what are called the higher centers, the higher emotional and higher intellectual centers.
Higher centers? Like, what does that translate to?
Think of it as the capacity for deeper empathy, real creative insight, a connection to more abstract, universal truths. It's this potential that makes genuine esoteric work, conscious inner development, spiritual seeking, possible and meaningful for Adamic types.
So they have the hardware, even if the software isn't running yet.
That's a decent analogy, yeah. The term Adamic itself links to the Garden of Eden story, suggesting a memory, however faint, of a higher state, a lost harmony. This memory might be what drives that feeling of something more that seekers often report.
Like an internal compass pointing towards something else.
Exactly. Moraviev even uses the prodigal son parable. Earth is the far country, and the journey back is that difficult path of spiritual awakening for the Adamic line. Now, pre-Adamic man, in contrast, is described as not having this potential for an individuated soul and lacking access to those developed higher centers. They are seen as sort of native to this third-density reality, Earth. They weren't part of the biblical fall because, well, they weren't in Eden to begin with.
So different origins, different capabilities from the get-go.
Fundamentally different internal structures, yes. Their being is primarily governed by the lower centers, instinct, basic emotions, and intellect focused on the material world, the here and now.
But the source material, it stresses they look identical. You can't tell them apart just by looking.
Absolutely crucial point. Moraviev is very clear. In normal life, you generally can't distinguish between them. They have the same drives, same basic personality structures, same physical bodies. Sometimes the pre-Adamic might even be more robust physically.
Oh.
He even mentions that the pre-Adamic race was also created by God in his image, and their daughters were beautiful. So appearance tells you nothing. The difference is deep inside, internal.
An invisible line running through humanity. That's quite a thought. And the Cassiopeans then built on this pre-Adamic idea, calling them organic portals.
That seems to be the connection, yes. And they add another layer, a really provocative one. They suggest that psychopaths, clinical psychopaths, are essentially malfunctioning pre-Adamics.
Malfunctioning? Whoa, okay, that's a heavy statement. Let's unpack the characteristics then. If organic portals lack these higher centers, how does that actually, show up?
Right. What does it look like in practice? The core difference, again, is the supposed absence of these higher emotional and intellectual capacities. And to illustrate this, the source material points heavily to the work of Hervey Cleckley.
Cleckley. Oh, the mask of sanity.
Exactly. A classic study of psychopathy. Cleckley describes the psychopath as presenting this incredibly convincing mask of sanity. On the surface, everything seems fine. They're logical, articulate, can express emotions appropriately for the situation, can be charming.
So they're expert actors, essentially, blending right in.
Master mimics. But Cleckley observed that after interacting with them enough, this feeling dawns on you. That you're not dealing with a whole person. It's more like a subtly constructed reflex machine that can mimic human personality perfectly.
A machine mimicking a person?
Yeah. He stresses how perfect the mimicry is. You also can't objectively prove anything is missing using standard tests. Yet there's this persistent gut feeling that the real substance of human experience, that deep inner life, just is not there. Something vital is absent.
That's profoundly disturbing. The idea of someone looking and acting human but lacking that core spark. And this is the parallel being drawn to organic portals.
Yes. The theory presented is that the psychopath, like Cleckley described, is a kind of failed or glitchy organic portal. Their imitation mechanism has flaws, which is why they eventually get noticed or cause obvious harm.
Okay.
The implication being that these successful organic portals, the vast majority, according to this view, are much better mimics. They navigate society perfectly, fly completely under the radar.
So most OPs, as they call them, aren't criminals. They're not the ones making headlines.
Exactly. The theory suggests most OPs aren't breaking laws. In fact, they often strive very hard to conform to social norms, what Moraviev called A influences.
A influences. What are those?
Things like chasing money, sex, power, status, fame. The standard goals society often pushes. They pursue these things, perhaps very effectively, but maybe without that deeper sense of searching for true happiness or that feeling of something more that supposedly nags at the Adamic type.
Huh. So maybe the thing a society tells us to want are kind of tailored to that OP mindset.
That's a provocative question the source raises, yes. Could these common goals be part of a larger control system that keeps people chasing external validation instead of inner development? It's a cynical take, but it fits the framework.
It definitely makes you think about societal values differently. Now, the source also throws out a number that it stops you in your tracks. Potentially 3 billion organic portals.
Yes. Based on their interpretation of the Cassiopeian material and their own research, the Quantum Future Group estimates the number could be around 3 billion.
3 billion.
Which would mean roughly, potentially 1 out of every 2 people you meet might fit this description, lacking an individuated soul in the way Moraviev and the Cassiopeians define it.
1 out of 2. Wow, okay. That number alone just forces you to reconsider everything about human interaction, doesn't it?
It's a staggering proposition. It changes the entire landscape of how you might view social dynamics, history, everything.
Right. Let's connect this back to the fall you mentioned earlier and the idea of 2 distinct races. How does that fit in?
Moraviev's idea is that there were these 2 original lineages, Adamic and preadamic, who eventually intermingled here on Earth. The Adamic line, the one with the potential for higher connection, underwent this fall.
Not like a literal apple-eating event, but more gradual.
Less a single event, more a process of disconnection, according to this view. A severing of the link between their higher and lower selves. This left them functioning in their everyday awareness in this material world much closer to the pre-Adamic state, like they forgot their own potential.
Spiritual amnesia. Got it. And the Cassiopeian view adds more detail.
A more cosmic scale, perhaps. They describe the fall not just as happening on Earth, but as a fracturing of a whole consciousness unit. Originally, this unit was third density service to others, STO, aligned with higher fourth density STO realms.
STO versus STS, service to others versus service to self. Common concepts in some of this material.
Right, and this fracturing shifted them into a third density service to self STS orientation. Why? The Cassiopeians mention a choice to experience greater physicality, being lured by gold, maybe symbolic of material power and desire, and aligning with entities they call
Lizzies.
Lizzies. Okay, now we're definitely in stranger territory. Who or what are they supposed to be?
Before we touch on that, speaking of exploring the strange, if you're into this kind of mind-bending journey, do us a solid. Hit that like button, definitely subscribe for more deep dives, and, click the notification bell so you catch our next adventure into the unknown.
Good call.
So within the Cassiopeian framework, Lizzies generally refers to negative, manipulative, self-serving entities operating from the fourth density. Think of them as part of the opposing force in this cosmic drama.
Got it. So aligning with these STS forces led to the disconnection. The result of this fall was losing that connection to the higher centers, making the fallen Adamic race operate much like the pre-Adamic race naturally does. It put them at a disadvantage in this denser, more competitive 3D STS reality. They lost their original state of being almost like a sort of 4D state aligned with 4D STO.
So the fall kind of leveled the playing field downwards, making the potentially souled group operate more like the naturally soulless group in everyday life here.
Right.
That's a disruptive idea. Okay, what about the function of organic portals in this whole system? Why are they here? What do they do?
The Cassiopeian definition is quite concise. They are organic portals between levels of density. That's presented as their primary role in the cosmic ecosystem.
Portals between densities.
Yeah.
Okay. What does that mean practically? And does it mean trying to help them is pointless?
That question comes up directly in the source. The quoted answer from the Cassiopeians is pretty stark. Pretty much. Most of them are very efficient machines. The ones that you have identified as psychopaths are failures. The best ones cannot be discerned except by long and careful observation.
Efficient machines. Wow, that's cold. Very detached.
It is. And there's another interesting statistic mentioned regarding their role in our lives. Apparently, a souled person normally encounters OPs about half as often as other souled people.
Okay, so fewer OPs usually.
But, and this is key, that ratio supposedly changes dramatically if someone starts serious soul growth, serious esoteric work. Then the control system, those 4D STS forces.
The Lizzies and their ilk.
Presumably, they will deliberately insert more OPs, more of these units into that person's life.
Why? To drain them, distract them, throw them off course.
That seemed to be the implication, yes. Obstacles, energy drains, reality checks, maybe. The text also brings up the idea of pollution of the bloodline.
Sounds ominous.
It refers to the genetic mixing of these 2 alleged races over thousands and thousands of years. But it's crucial to understand this doesn't mean any specific race or ethnicity today is purely one or the other. It's completely mixed.
So you can have both types in the same family?
Absolutely. Both Adamic and pre-Adamic potential can exist side by side in the same family. So identifying someone isn't about their group or background, it's about individual genetics, or rather, the soul potential tied to it.
So no easy shortcuts based on race or anything like that. And for the Adamic person, getting back that connection to higher centers, isn't about, like, genetic tweaking.
No, the source is very clear on that.
Yeah.
Reconnecting isn't achieved through influences, external things, societal pressures, even genetic manipulation. It's through dedicated inner work, esoteric practice.
An inner journey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cultivating and fusing what they call the magnetic center, which is considered a B, influence and internal spiritual potential. It's like inner alchemy, rebuilding that bridge to higher consciousness from the inside out.
Okay, so OPs act as these interdensity portals, maybe serve the control system, and their presence might increase for seekers. How does this fit into the bigger picture of why the world is the way it is, this matrix control system idea?
Well, the theory suggests that having potentially half the population operating without that inherent spiritual connection, without those higher centers, goes a long way toward explaining, well, a lot. The state of the planet, the prevalence of materialism, conflict, and so on.
It provides a framework for understanding the status quo.
Exactly. And it suggests these 4D STS forces actively use OPs, not just as tools, but as energy sources. They harvest that emotional energy, the loosh, generated by conflict and suffering, often channeled through OPs.
Spiritual energy harvesting, that's a core theme in a lot of this alternative material.
It is, and the quantum future school discussions, as documented, really wrestled with the relationship between psychopaths and OPs. The idea solidified that psychopaths are like OPs with glitches, the ones who stand out.
While the garden variety OP is much smoother.
Much harder to spot, yes. Capable of perfectly faking a soul, maybe even by subtly drawing energy from souled people around them. This is distinct, they say, from secondary psychopaths.
And those are?
Souled individuals who've consciously chosen the STS path, the dark side, using their abilities manipulatively.
So there are nuances. It's not just souled good guys and soulless bad guys.
Definitely not that simple.
Yeah.
And there's even a fascinating speculation about the original function of OPs. Maybe it wasn't always negative.
Oh, what's the idea?
Perhaps they were originally intended as a sort of natural bridge for souls evolving from second density, the animal kingdom, with its group consciousness or group souls.
Oh, totem spirits, yeah.
Evolving towards the individualized consciousness of third density humans. A natural step in creation.
A transitional phase.
Exactly. But this natural function, the theory goes, was hijacked, co-opted by 4D STS forces for their own agenda. Energy draining, keeping soul beings distracted, preventing spiritual progress.
Wow. A natural process twisted for control. That adds another layer entirely. Okay, so thinking about how OPs function internally, how do they see the world? What's their default perspective, lacking these higher centers?
Well, without that access to higher emotion, deeper intuition, or a sense of spiritual reality, they would naturally gravitate towards materialistic explanations for everything.
Makes sense.
They might dismiss esoteric ideas, conspiracy theories, anything outside the purely physical, simply because they lack the internal equipment to resonate with it or perceive its validity.
So it could explain why some very intelligent people, say, in science, remain staunchly materialistic. They just don't have the inner experience to consider alternatives.
That's exactly the argument presented. Their internal limitations define the boundaries of what they consider possible or real. The source contrasts this with the whole debate on consciousness.
Right. The hard problem.
You have the mainstream materialistic Darwinian view, mind as a brain byproduct, brain as a computer, culture driven by means competing.
Like Richard Dawkins' ideas.
Precisely. Dawkins and meme theory are mentioned as examples of explaining creativity and consciousness in purely mechanistic terms. Ideas are just replicators. Creation is just remixing old stuff.
Okay.
This is contrasted sharply with the esoteric view. True creativity comes from connecting to higher realms, like the seventh density, through those higher centers. It's an expression of divine love, not just rearranging bits.
So for the OP, creativity is just imitation because that's all their mechanism allows.
That's the suggestion. They can imitate, rearrange, synthesize, but not originate in the same way a potentially souled being connected to higher centers might.
A fundamental difference in the source of ideas.
Yes. And philosopher Dan Dennett's view of the self as just a bundle of computational programs is also brought in.
How does that fit?
It's seen as aligning well with how an OP might function, or even how a souled person functions, before they do the inner work, what more of you have called the external man, dominated by shifting little eyes.
As opposed to the potential for a unified self.
Right. Moravieff describes the possibility for the Adamic type to build a permanent, unified I through intense self-observation and esoteric work, a potential supposedly present in about half the population.
So these materialistic theories might accurately describe the OP, or the undeveloped souled person, but miss the potential for transformation?
Exactly. They describe the machine, but not the potential ghost in the machine, or the process of the ghost fully integrating with the machine. The discussion also touches on qualia's subjective experience and the philosophical zombie idea.
The zombie twin who acts conscious but isn't.
Yeah, and the argument made by someone like Francis Halligan, if the zombie is indistinguishable, it must be conscious. The source flips this.
Right.
What if half the population are these incredibly sophisticated zombies perfectly mimicking consciousness without the inner light?
That's deeply unsettling.
And Halligan's view that beings sense the world only relative to their survival goals, that's linked to the predator mindset, like the psychopath again. It all ties back together.
So the conclusion is materialistic science might describe the OP perfectly, but it falls short for the seeker on the path.
That's the essence of it. It describes one type of consciousness, or perhaps the baseline state, but not the full spectrum or the potential for spiritual evolution.
Okay, this is a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Now, the really tricky part, if they are such perfect mimics, the good ones, how could anyone possibly identify them? Are there any clues at all?
The source is up front about how difficult, maybe impossible it is for most people most of the time. Their primary talent is imitation. But Moravieff offers one potential indicator.
Yes. What is it?
A distinct lack of deep internal conflict or doubt about their own beliefs, their own thoughts, or the nature of the system they live in.
So a kind of unwavering certainty.
Perhaps. Or just an absence of that profound existential angst, that nagging, is this all there is, feeling that often drives the Adamic seeker. You know, the feeling Morpheus talks about in The Matrix, you know something, what you know you can't explain. That inner dissonance is seen as a hallmark of the souled individual in an imperfect world.
Whereas the OP is just comfortable. They fit right in.
More at ease, yes. The source clarifies they do have inner conflicts, but they're more superficial, like different desires pulling them, little eyes fighting, or wanting something that conflicts with bodily needs. These get resolved by compromise within the system.
Not the deep soul level conflict.
Exactly. Not the conflict that comes from the real I being fundamentally out of sync with the material world. The OP is fully of this world. The souled person retains a memory, however buried, of other worlds, creating a tension. That tension fuels the quest.
One is native, the other is an amnesiac exile, maybe?
It captures the feeling, yes. And the general law, the A influences the control system. It all works to keep people in line. If a seeker starts stepping out, seeking B influences, spiritual truth,
The system pushes back?
often using the people closest to them, who might be OPs or just souled people firmly embedded in the A influences, they act as agents of the status quo, consciously or unconsciously.
Pulling them back into the consensus reality?
Right. The source notes that OPs rarely resonate deeply with B influences. They might find them curious, but not life-altering. Their core driver tends to be the lower centers, especially temperament or the sexual center.
Interesting. And seekers might seem weaker in worldly terms.
So sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
Because they're fighting the dominant current A influences, they might struggle more with worldly success compared to OPs who are perfectly adapted to swim with that current.
Like swimming upstream versus downstream. Okay, this is all fascinating theory. But, practically speaking, if there could be billions of them, and they're often undetectable, what does this mean for us, for you, the listener, day to day? How do you even deal with that?
It's a huge question. The source acknowledges that feeling of being overwhelmed and the question of, can I really see this? The answer given is, yes, the evidence is there, but we're programmed not to see it, often by the system itself, maybe even influenced by OPs in our lives.
Programmed to dismiss or ignore the anomalies?
Something like that. The state of the world, the chaos, the materialism, the lack of empathy is presented as indirect evidence of their widespread influence.
So the sheer dysfunction is the evidence, in a way.
Potentially.
Yeah.
But given that the best ones, as the Cassiopeans put it, are nearly impossible to spot definitively,
Yeah.
the focus really has to shift.
Shift from identifying them to...
Managing your own energy.
Yeah.
Avoiding the dance, as the source calls it, those interactions that drain you, entangle you, and pull you away from your own inner work and soul growth.
Energy conservation.
Exactly. The goal, from this perspective, isn't labeling people, but preserving your own vitality and raising your frequency. This is linked to the idea of potentially graduating, or shifting to a higher density reality, maybe a 4D STO path.
So it's less about who they are and more about who you are becoming and protecting your energy for that journey.
Precisely. Interestingly, the source suggests maybe souled people are actually easier to spot sometimes.
How so?
Because of their inherent suffering, their friction against this 3D STS reality. Even if they learn to play the game, there's often an underlying sense of dissonance or longing. Though, they can also get caught channeling their soul energy into matrix-supporting beliefs.
Right. So the core reason to even consider this OP concept is energy management, avoiding brains.
That's presented as the most practical application. That conserved energy is supposedly vital for reaching the escape velocity or graduation frequency needed for a reality shift.
But there's a catch, isn't there?
The catch-22, yeah. You can't really see them clearly until you limit interaction, but you don't know who to limit interaction with until you can see them clearly.
So what's the workaround?
The suggestion is to treat it like an experiment. Pay very close attention to how you feel during and after interactions. Notice patterns. Observe reactions in the broader matrix. This gradual process of observation and experimentation leads to better discernment and energy conservation.
So trust your gut feelings about being drained.
That seems to be a key part of it. Discerning the nature of your relationships is the process of discerning A and B influences. It's presented as the most crucial work. Think about the idea of not being unequally yoked.
Right, in relationships, partnerships.
Does the connection uplift you, challenge you constructively, or does it consistently deplete you, make you feel diminished, confused? Focusing on the energetic exchange rather than definitively labeling someone as an OP, especially subtle cases, might be more fruitful.
Like if you always need to recharge after seeing someone, that's a potential sign.
It's offered as a possible indicator of that subtle energy drain dynamic, yes. A sign that the energetic give and take isn't balanced, perhaps because you're interacting with someone operating from that different OP framework.
Okay, so focus on your own energy, your own feelings, the quality of connection.
And the ultimate aim expressed by the Quantum Future School, as stated in the material, is this idea of eventually leaving third-density STS Earth to its original inhabitants, acknowledging the difficulty of coexisting with such fundamentally different ways of being, sort of wishing them well for the next cycle.
Wow, okay. That is quite the conclusion to aim for. This whole exploration has been absolutely mind-altering. It really forces you to question the basic assumptions about reality, about people.
It definitely does. These concepts challenge the bedrock of how we perceive humanity and the potential unseen influences shaping our world. It calls for, I think, a much deeper level of self-awareness and careful discernment in our interactions.
So for you listening as you process all this, think about your own experiences. Does this framework resonate with anything you've observed or felt? Consider the dynamics in your life, your connections, maybe those little intuitive hits you've ignored, now that you've taken this deep dive with us into this unsettling maybe, but undeniably compelling perspective. How might it reshape your view of the world, of conflict, of your own relationships?
It certainly pushes us to think more deeply about things like empathy, authenticity, and those subtle energy flows between people that we usually don't pay much attention to.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for bringing this incredibly provocative material to the table, and thank you for taking this journey with us. It's really opened up a huge, mysterious landscape, leaving us, I think, with a renewed sense of awe about the deep enigmas of human existence. Until next time, keep questioning, keep observing, and keep diving deep.